Hello, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. Welcome to Connect Africa. We are here on Sunday evening to bring you the latest to you regarding India and Africa's relation. It's a kind of an extension from what we did last time, meaning on Thursday. So, as usual, Kwame Gonza is here with us. Our topic tonight is regarding India's investment attraction and why is the rush? Kwame is here to spill all the tea so that we have a better understanding. Our topic from last on Thursday was because of India's announcement to back out from BRICS currency. So is India blocking it? So we gave you all the details. So now we have seen and observed that there is a need even to analyze a deeper history or political history and India's relation with Africa. Remember, what's happening is it's a rush for a scramble Africa, but a modern time scramble for Africa. So India is having its own policy and strategy to challenge China so that in its competition to get Africa. Now, welcome Kwame on a Sunday evening. It's our first time, I think.
Thank you very much, Mahlet, and greetings to everyone who's watching us from across the globe. As Mahlet has mentioned, this is a follow-up program on one of our discussions which we had recently concerning whether India was trying to dump the BRICS currency, whether it was coming up against the BRICS currency. And of course, we saw it from different angles, and we looked at India's interests and probably the possible manipulation that may be in of the United States and how it may want to manipulate and destroy BRICS from inside. But we are sure this is something which is India is aware. But today we are coming on a different note that we want to look at areas where India has been successful. We recognize that India has been successful in a major way in many industries. If you look at its performance on an industrial scale, and of course not on the same scale as China, but because we are looking at Africa, we want to compare it with Africa. It has been much more successful than Africa. So we want to look at what is it that India is doing right, and then what are those particular industries that India has succeeded at. And on top of that, we want to look at what can Africa do by itself, if it is able to attract investment in the same way, or if it is to have success on an industrial scale, of the same level as India. So these are the things which we want to discuss this evening. But we want to thank you, everyone who is subscribed to the channel, who is supporting the channel, because without your support, we cannot be here. And then on top of that, we cannot do the work which we are engaged in. We recognize that we are in changing times today, and in this period, as you have seen the geopolitical forces going on. So we decided to make our contribution here at Connect Africa, working with other organizations. We have mentioned in many broadcasts, many videos in the past, that we are working with other organizations, especially Pan-African organizations, to be able to make our contribution towards building the new Africa which we all desire, because we all recognize that Africa is in a position which is undesirable to its citizens, and hence that's why we see our people drowning in the Mediterranean Ocean. So I don't want to talk very much, but we are doing the work on the ground. We have the support of people like Piero Lumumba. We have worked with him on numerous cases and other Pan-African organizations. So this is the work we want to be engaged with. This is the work you want to support. So we invite you to be part of us, be part of Connect Africa. It is not only a YouTube broadcast. It is a very strong organization, even with a website. You can reach out to our website, connecttoafrica.org. We have another website called africainterest.org, but our very own is called connecttoafrica.org. And then we have another one of our colleagues we are working with, africainterest.org. So we write analysis, and then we write about the future, where we want the continent to go. Inga Dam and GAD, Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, all these things we've been discussing about them, the future of the continent itself. So we invite you to be part of that journey. Sorry, Mahlet, for taking so much time in talking a lot of, but let's get to it. Thank you very much. And I welcome everyone who is watching us.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. It's good to remind our viewers that your support is important. Yeah, so as you watch this, please share the video with others. Click subscribe and share, and give it, if you like it, also give it a like. As you watch us, we need to share the knowledge.
Let them be part of us. Let them be part of us. All those ones, yes.
And ask questions. Okay, now, so without further ado, let's go to straight to the question. As we always say, that this is a research-based information or discussion that we bring you here. So we always start from the background story, then it will help us to understand better the situation or the dynamic. Now, Kwame, what I want you to do is, if you can give us, as any ordinary citizen, as a layman who do not know the background, if you can give us some sort of comparison between India and Africa, and what are those, as you tried to mention, the few areas that the things that India has been doing recently, so that it gives us a better understanding where the word that we used in our very topic is India outsmarting Africa in terms of attracting investments. So yeah, if you lay out that, it will give us a better understanding, and we go further.
Okay, Mahlet, thank you so much. Yeah, so if we look at these two, let me call them territories, because we have not yet solidified Africa as a country. I know many people have been saying Africa is not a country, Africa is what? But of course, we as Pan-Africanists, we want to make it a country. So even though other people, they think there's a point in saying that Africa is not a country, but as Pan-Africanists, we see it as a country. We want to make it a country. We want to make it one country, which has all the other states, like how you see the United States. So Africa is huge in size. And when you look at the land mass of the African continent, I think India is smaller. Is smaller, 5 times smaller than the African continent. You could put about 5 Indias in the African continent, and they would go in, all of them. So that is one side. When you look at the population, we are almost equal when it comes to population. India is just slightly higher than the African continent, just slightly, but all of them are around 1.4 billion people when it comes to the population. And now at this point also, when it comes to the GDP, the official figures, for example, if you look at Google and try to examine from Google, it shows you that India also is slightly higher. But from our research, what we have seen is that India is around 3.2 to 3.5 trillion dollars, and Africa is around 3.4 to 3.5 trillion dollars when it comes to GDP, the combined GDP of the continent, because the African continent is very fragmented. In most of the cases, its data is not looked at wholesomely as a continent, because of the way it is fragmented into about 55 African countries. So that is it when it comes to the population. and when it comes to the GDP. So when you talk of resources, material resources, Africa has a lot of resources that, as you have seen, that I've mentioned. When it comes to the land mass, it is able to, the resources which it has are able to support about 5 times, the population of, in the size of India, what India can support currently. So it has a lot of resources. So that is not an accident that many countries have a lot of interest in the African continent. Let me see, what else can I look at? I think at that point, I think we can start from there. We'll pick it up from there and look at it from there. But I think those are the things which a lay person can look at and to get just a basic picture of the two continents. Africa, of course, is diverse. I think that is one of the other things which I wanted to look at. I think Africa is extremely diverse because we have more than 2,000 tribes, in sub-Saharan Africa alone. In addition, you have Arabs in the north, and then you have some Europeans, of course, on the African continent in the south, in South Africa. So that brings in a level of diversity which India doesn't have. That, of course, India also is diverse, but not to the level of the African continent. So comparatively, you would say that India is a bit homogeneous, even though is also diverse. But compared to Africa, India is homogeneous when you look at it. Yeah. So these are the simple comparisons to give you that picture which I was talking about when you compare the two territories.
That's as far as the territory is concerned. Now, if you can take us through in the areas where you feel, as far as your research and reading is concerned, where you feel India is making a progress compared to Africa. Where are we stuck, and where are they making the difference?
Yeah. So India is really making a lot of progress. It has been making a lot of progress ever since, I think, they got President or the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is considered to some extent a strong man. If you look at how he operates and how he was talked about in the past, even in the United States, even in the West, they used to talk about him as some sort of a dictator or something. So India has really made tremendous changes ever since he came to power in the various, almost all sectors of industry. And it's because they have a focused leader. They have a very focused leader. And if you look at it, they have a unified policy. In the past, what has been holding India back is the wrangling internal weakness. The fact that they adopted a political system from the West, just like Africa, of course. And that political system allows people to war against each other within the territory, within the country, to the point that it is very hard to reach consensus easily and then take a position and move in one direction, all of you, which is different from what is happening in China. But when the Prime Minister Narendra Modi came, he sort of changed that direction. He changed that dynamic, that there's a way he has managed to have decisions, to be made quickly in sort of a dictatorial way, or sort of an authoritarian way. Now, I use the word authoritarian not in a negative way, because many people, when they hear dictatorial and authoritarian, they immediately think of bad, because those words have been used negatively by the West to paint those people they don't want. But immediately the Prime Minister Modi came to power, he commissioned a committee to study how China has been able to reach where it is, how China has performed very well like that. And he wanted to examine why India has been slow, even though it has some of the most educated people across the globe. If you go to the United States, India is supplying engineers and doctors. You know, it is even evident when you go to Google, Microsoft, all these companies now are being run by Indians. So Microsoft, Google, you know, so it is evident that they have very good education system. They have educated their people, but there was some weaknesses. So he wanted this committee to examine and come up with a report why China has been able to do whatever it has been to do, so that India can make those adjustments. So I believe that those are the adjustments which the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been able to make ever since he came to power, and hence we see that India now is moving rapidly. And one of those industries where it is moving is that it is the industry of automobile. If you look at the automobile industry, you can see they have Tata, they have Mahindra, and to the point that Tata has been successful as an automobile company to the point that it came and bought Range Rover. So that is one of the industry, and it is growing rapidly. That industry also is growing rapidly in India. And Tata also has stakes in one of the biggest airlines in India, which we will talk about also when we talk about airlines. Then there is the industry of manufacturing trains, rolling stock. You can see that India right now has a very well networked railway industry. Okay, so they are moving rapidly in that direction. And when you compare to Africa, Africa's railway industry is from the colonial era that is very fragmented, and is very few railway lines. Like you can speak of the Djibouti and Ethiopia line, which is a standard gauge railway. Then you can speak of Kenya's recent railway line, which has been built by Kenya, was built by President Uhuru Kenyatta with the help of the Chinese. And very few of the lines, but majority of our lines on the continent, they are from the colonial era, and they are fragmented. So that is another, you know, success which India has, that it has a comprehensive, well-connected railway industry, which is, and if you look at transportation, railway is the cheapest means of transport. So we have spoken about the automobile industry. Africa does not have a functional automobile industry. The automobile industry which we have is foreign companies which are here, and of course our own manufacturers have started here and there to try to, with assembly, of course, bringing in kits and assembling. You can talk of Kantanka in Ghana, Kantanka Automobile in Ghana. You can talk of Inoson in Nigeria. You can talk of Kira Motors, which is just starting in Uganda. You can go to Kenya. But majority of them, when you go to South Africa, for example, they are foreign manufacturers like Peugeot, Volkswagen, Toyota, Nissan. All these are their Ford. They're just assembling you know, vehicle parts which are manufactured like from the United States. And so, as I mentioned, on the automobile, we are lagging behind, and it's because we are not coordinated. Our efforts are not coordinated as Africans. On the railway industry, also the railway industry, which is considered the cheapest modes of transporting goods over long distances, also we are not coordinated when it comes. We are very fragmented, that our railway industry is not coordinated. And when you come to the aircraft industry, India is also making, you know, huge progress in that area, to the point that recently the biggest order that actually has ever been placed you know, of aircraft was done by an Indian company recently at the Paris Air, you know, Paris Air Show, which was around more than 500 aircraft were ordered with a value of more than $120 billion. So they have an integrated market. India has an integrated market. Meanwhile, our market in Africa is fragmented. Now, on top of that aircraft industry, they have partnered up with the United States. If you remember, the Prime Minister Modi recently, when he was in the United States, he struck up agreements and they signed the MOUs, memorandums of understanding, with General Electric. General Electric will start manufacturing aircraft engines in India. So this is how industries are birthed. Now India is about to have its own aircraft industry like that, and actually they have actually tried and built even their own fighter jet recently. I don't remember the name of that fighter jet. Maybe one of the people who are watching can give us an understanding of that particular aircraft and the name of it, India's fighter jet. So you can see that on that point, on that area also, they are moving very well. Now you can talk of also an industry like aerospace, in going to space, going to the moon, sending satellites. India is also moving in that direction, and also has patterned with the is trying to pattern up with the United States, and also that is one of the MOUs were signed with the United States. That India will be able to cooperate with the United States in the space industry. Now, in the pharmaceuticals, that one I don't have even to talk about it, because if you go around, pharmacies all across the African continent, you will see that a lot of drugs are made in India. So they are making huge progress. I think they also even were able to manufacture their own. They were able to manufacture their own COVID vaccine while Africa was struggling and begging. You saw President Ramaphosa recently how he was bitter with Europe because they withheld the vaccines from Africa, and they were begging them, even to the point that when we wanted to manufacture the vaccines by ourselves, we asked for the technology. They were refusing to give us the technology because they want to make money off it. They think that we are taking intellectual property, so they want to make money off it. So these are the things which, for example, President Cyril Ramaphosa was bitter about, that Africa wanted to manufacture, and these people are talking about making money and profit when lives are at stake. But when you look at India on that side of industry, it is doing very well, that it is exporting to the rest of the world. So in these areas, Africa is not doing well simply because it is fragmented. Our market is fragmented, and I know that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is trying to integrate that market, but it will be very difficult, very, very difficult, extremely difficult to integrate the market if the political system on the African continent is not integrated, if there's no authority to look after, to enforce all these policies, these policies, however good they may be on the continent. If those policies, there's no one to enforce them, then it will be difficult. It will be very, very difficult. The best you will be engaged in is settling disputes between these bodies, these countries which are warring against each other. For example, rules of origin of products and all that. So these could be major problems for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So we are very fragmented. The population is fragmented. The market is fragmented. The political system is fragmented. So these advantages, all these advantages which we have, which I will mention later, they are not useful to us because we are fragmented. We cannot take, advantage of, our leverage. We cannot take advantage. We cannot use our advantages to the maximum because we are very much fragmented. So these are the industries. These are that I would talk about when it comes to India and Africa, and where it has been, making huge progress compared to the African continent.
It's indeed interesting how India has made a progress in those areas, and at the same time, sad as an African, how Africa did not advance in those areas while it has it's the resource, the manpower, and everything, just because simply a lack of leadership in the continent. Yeah. Now, has India been like this, and what has changed really if it has not been like this. Can you take us into the political system in India as compared to Africa and China?
Yeah, so yeah, it's very good that I've mentioned it. When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was the civil rights leader, went to India, actually, he mentioned he saw the state in which India was, that he was worried and said that he doesn't know how the Prime Minister, Nehru, that time he was going to deal with India's problems because the population is huge and then the resources are very sort of meager. There are very little resources available. So he was worried and said that he doesn't really understand how uh, the Prime Minister, Nehru, during that period is going to overcome the challenge which India has. So India has been having a challenge which I've already touched a little bit, that the political system itself, which they adopted from the West, which is the Western type of democracy, that system actually is not really very favorable. It's not favorable at all for nations which are just developing and they're just coming up. And that is why I've mentioned that it is until the Prime Minister Modi came to power that you are starting to see some clarity, some sort of direction, clarity and direction where India is going, because he's seen as a man of steel. He's seen as an authoritarian person. When nations are taking off at the takeoff stages, they need very strong people. I know people have, have been comparing many countries in Africa to Singapore.
You need to turn it around. Yeah, no, we just missed that. Sorry, I muted you.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Ekpon,
Hello,
Ekpon.
Mahlet.
Yeah, we hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What I was saying was that when you look at Singapore, countries like Singapore, for example, the leader, Lee Kuan Yew, was seen as an authoritarian, somebody who, ran even the opposition out of the country. In many cases, you would not call
Your
this
voice is
democracy,
getting
how
low.
it was
Sorry
developed,
to
but it
disturb
was
the
because
Kwame.
somebody had a very strong arm and understood that if a nation is starting out, you have to have very strong people. When you look at the nations of Europe, they had strong men during the infant stages. They are infant stages, even the United States itself. You cannot consider it a democracy when it was taking off during the takeoff stage. But this is the misleading that has been given to the global south, and specifically Africa and Latin America, that you have to be a democracy in order for you to develop. And yet democracy is not the prerequisite for development. Of course, this is something which we can talk of another day. So the political system compared to China, whereby the country had a clear direction because of the favorable political system that is taking it in that direction, China was able to develop rapidly. So that is the clarity which has come up a little bit when you look at countries like India, compared to the past. That today you see that there's a bit of clarity when it comes to the past.
Your sound was lower compared to before. Just what
Hello.
happened? Your sound was lower. It's lower than before. I don't know if it's just because of what happened to the phone right now.
Hello, Mahlet, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you now. Better. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, somebody interrupted the call. There's somebody who called me and they interrupted. Yeah.
Okay.
So let me just run back a little bit. So what I was saying was that when you look at India, the political system which was adopted is from the West,
Mm-hmm.
and if you compare that to China, the Chinese, they have a different political system. That their political system, it enables the leadership to marshal all the resources, or to get all the resources and move with them and use them in one direction. Okay, so everyone is on the same page. Everyone actually is forced to be on the same page, regardless of where you are going. And then they have a way of adopting their system, that they understand that we are in a period, maybe sort of crisis. In that period of crisis, we need concentrated power. Power needs to be, vested in the hands of one person, like what is happening today. When you look at political scientists, what they have been saying, like Eric Lee, that because right now they are facing a lot of challenge, they took power and put it in the hands of President Xi Jinping. Unlike the period when Deng Xiaoping was there and Hu Jintao was there, that power was a little bit there diluted, and his power, the president's powers were reduced a little bit, because it was a period of a little bit of calm. It was not very turbulent like today, but today they face a lot of challenge. So in those turbulent periods or difficult periods, you need power to be concentrated in one person or in a group of people, a few people, so that decision making can be rapid, can be very quick. And so that is what you are seeing in India also, that Modi has been called an authoritarian, even when he came to power, that he is eroding democracy. You had all these things, even when you look at the media, look at the Western media. They were saying that he's eroding democracy. It's because he was trying to consolidate that power in order to make the process of decision making easier for the country, so that the country can be able to move forward. And that's what has been holding India back, that it has not been having power which is concentrated, that you have different groups warring. This one is pulling this side, this one is pulling this side. They are always arguing, that it takes very long to reach that a decision, a resolute decision. It takes very long to reach a resolution whereby we say we should take this direction. Now, in China, it is not like that. So by the time India was engaging in all this, drama, China was moving rapidly, that they were making mistakes. Of course, leaders make mistakes when you give them a lot of power. They made mistakes, but they would correct it. They would rapidly correct it. And now for the democracies, when they make mistakes, it's very even difficult to correct it. Another one who will say that they are the best. They will come and correct it. When they come to power, they make even much more mistakes, and then they will be changing. So the process, which is supposed to be a process of correcting, it doesn't happen. Now, I spoke about Singapore also, because Singapore has been compared to many countries across the African continent. Singapore had a man who gave it direction for 30 solid years. Lee Kuan Yew. He led Singapore for over 30 solid years. And when you look at his type of governance, it can be considered authoritarian and dictatorial. But this is what brought Singapore, out of the pit where it was when it was abandoned by Malaysia. So, because it was part of Malaysia. Now, for us to understand why India has not been able to achieve in the past what it is achieving today, that is where we can go to examine. When we examine history and examine political systems and leaders, how they are operating, that is the answer which you can give. And you can see that in Africa, we have not had that kind of situation where you look at countries like Ghana, where, of course, it is many times compared to Singapore, and say, why is Ghana where it is, or why is Uganda, Kenya where it is, and Singapore is this side. But look at countries like Ghana, when Nkrumah was there trying to give it direction, he was overthrown with the help of the West, of course. within 8 years, that he did not even get time to spend 15 years on the throne. And yet he was operating in the same fashion like how you see Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore was operating. He built a lot of industry. He was, of course, he had made some mistakes, but he was going to correct them. Because when you have time and you are pragmatic like how Nkrumah was and people like Singapore, we can't say that Lee Kuan Yew did not make mistakes. He also made mistakes, but he had time to correct them. Now Nkrumah did not get time to correct those mistakes, and he was overthrown. Of course, they capitalized on the mistakes. The West capitalized on those mistakes, and they helped some elements inside, and they overthrew him. So this is where we see that India is making those types of corrections within the country, and that is what is bringing that rapid development that we are seeing today, and is trying to to follow in the same footsteps as China. As I mentioned, China, the Prime Minister Modi, when he came, he commissioned the people to examine what China was doing well, so that they can be able to implement the same in India. And of course, that is adjusting the political system, adjusting the political power and the decision-making process.
Thank you very much, Kwame, for laying out that, especially how China is making a difference, to lay out that difference between China and India, although those are, in the same kind of condition, the number of population is the same, but how China was able to advance because of the political systems that they have implemented, and India by adopting that Western democracy, how they pull each other, and then that eventually affected the progress of the country. And then when it comes to Africa, now it's even much worse, because first of all, it's a different 55 sovereign nation, or 54. Although the AU is there as an umbrella and the unity is always talked about, but nobody's really walking truly towards to that direction. And as we see, that created a situation or an environment even for more modernized, or this neo-colonization in the continent by the same people, this time with a US-led West neo-colonizing Africa. And the scramble is even much worse than before. Now, in the midst of this, of course, we cannot stop asking what is the way forward? What is the way forward for Africa, for ordinary citizens like me and you, African citizens? What can we do by simply looking at, taking examples of what countries like India have done, and how do we bring our continent to the right direction?
Okay, Mahlet, thank you. So when you look at our continent, when you look at Africa, actually we have a lot of challenges that what India had actually as a single step, that the only challenge for them which they had was the political system. Their country was unified. Of course, there is still some differences and challenges with Pakistan and stuff like that. They have some internal problems, but you can say they are relatively unified as a continent. I mean, as a country, they are moving in one direction. It is easier to move in one direction if you correct the political system. The challenge with Africa is that now we have two steps. For us, we have two steps. And now this is not to say that we cannot do it, or we don't have the capability to do it. We have it, but it is a challenge. Of course, this is what needs to be appreciated. This needs to be recognized, that we have the challenge of fragmentation, that we are not yet unified. And now we are not yet unified, but at the same time, we have majority of the countries on the African continent, they are so invested in the Western political system. That is another challenge which may need to be overcome. So what India had as a single step, that one person like Prime Minister Modi has been able to correct, Africa still has around 2 steps, and that's what we are still grappling with. And that is why when you go back to people like Nkrumah in the 1960s, 1963, starting from 1957, Nkrumah laid out a plan in his book, which he published in 1953. The book is called Africa Must Unite. He said that for Africa to be able to start the process of reconstruction, this is something which I was, having a discussion today with someone. He said that Africa has to liberate itself, and then when it liberates itself, it has to consolidate that liberation. So that means you liberate the territories. It meant, for Nkrumah, liberation meant that you take all these African territories and you put them in the hands of people who are Afrocentric. And by Afrocentric, I mean people who have the interests of Africa at heart. Those are the people who are Afrocentric. These are the people Nkrumah meant that the continent should have, as leaders. So the territories of the African continent were supposed to be in the hands of these people. So that is what Nkrumah meant by liberation, liberate the continent. Now, the second step, which he said for him, was that unify. So the process of unification of the continent was supposed to be the process of consolidation of that independence, because what he understood is that there's going to be interference. Now, when you are talking about consolidation, the consolidation is the one which was supposed to block the external interests. When you are talking about countries like the United States, Europe, because he saw that they still have huge, interest in the African continent. They are so invested in the African continent that they don't want to leave. And how? Because they see it as a source of their raw materials. And this has gone on up to today. So he was saying that when you unify, then you consolidate the independence, because the independence, the importance of independence, it gives you the ability to act independently on all policies, political, foreign policy, economic policy. But when you are not fully independent in what we are calling today neocolonialism, which Nkrumah coined neocolonialism, then you cannot act independently. And hence you see countries like Ghana and all over, they are taking instructions, from the IMF. This is the reason why you cannot print money to build the infrastructure, but the United States can do that. Why? Because we are not independent. We are not fully independent. So he was saying that to consolidate that independence, then we have to unify as a continent, and then start the process of reconstruction. That is where reconstruction was supposed to start from. So if you asked me today that has Africa started the process of reconstruction, I would tell you that Africa has not started reconstruction. It has not yet started that process of reconstruction, because we have not yet liberated the continent fully. So there's no way we can have those tools. We don't have access to the tools of reconstruction. And that is why you are seeing our leaders, they are in Paris, they are being summoned in Paris, the Paris Agreement, and they are there, they are complaining about pharmaceuticals, COVID vaccines, and this and that. But India is not complaining. You didn't see India there complaining. You didn't see China over there complaining about vaccine. But we are complaining. Why? Because we are not independent. We don't have the tools of acting as independent, states or an independent continent. So many countries on the African continent don't print their own money. You have seen countries in West Africa, 14 of them, they are still putting their deposits in the French treasury. So these are the problems which Nkrumah envisioned and saw them plainly, and he warned the African leaders during that period in 1963. But they did not listen to him. So that level of independence has to be achieved. We have to understand that before we start the reconstruction, we have to liberate the continent. And this starts with the understanding by the African citizens themselves, the African people themselves. If we do not understand this, then we can have all types of saviors on the continent, but they will not help us, because some of us will be used against these particular saviors who have come up. You look at people like, for example, President Ruto. You can say that what he is trying to do It's the right thing, but he has challenges at home. And Nkrumah too had these problems. You have people who are opposing him at home. They are saying that he's not doing the right thing. And of course, I'm not saying he's an angel who's going to make things straight in one day and straighten them, or he's not going to make mistakes. He's going to make mistakes. But these people inside the continent who do not understand when a certain leader has come on the scene and should be supported, they instead fight him, and the colonialists who have interest in keeping the continent down, they use that as an opportunity to destroy this particular leader. And that is what we see if we are not very careful with people like President Ruto, because that has happened before with President Nkrumah, President Kwame Gonza, and Thomas Sankara, all these great leaders. This has happened to them, and some of our people may not see that. So that is why I'm saying that it requires us as Africans to recognize the time that we are living in. We are living in a period of tremendous changes today as we are speaking. And these things have been spoken about even in the media. You have heard them, for example, President Xi Jinping, when he was in Moscow meeting President Putin, he mentioned this in plain sight, in broad daylight. I said, we are seeing changes that have never happened in 100 years. So we should not take these things, lightly. You can see people like Ray Dalio, who's one of the, most powerful billionaires in the world. He wrote a book, The Changing World Order. So these are signs that should show us. So that means, as Africans on the continent, we need to take time out and look across the continent and see those particular leaders who are acting in the interest of the African continent, and then work with them, encourage them, or even support them, reach out to them and give them encouragement. Because being at the top there and you're confronting these forces, it is draining. Is very draining, because you are facing intimidation. Look at countries like South Africa, how much pressure it has been facing since 2021. By the United States, it has been putting a lot of pressure, blackmail inside. You have seen, blackmailing it and saying that South Africa is sending weapons, to Russia. So all this is blackmail. President Cyril Ramaphosa was, invited to Washington. All this was pressure, putting a lot of pressure. Blinken coming to South Africa. You can see all these pressures that are being put. So sometimes the leaders will face tremendous pressure. So if you put a word of encouragement, sometimes as we citizens, if we understand, we citizens of the African continent, if we understand and put in a word of encouragement, these people also get enough strength even to continue to fight for us out there. But all of us, if we stand on one side and we condemn and we say everything is condemned, nothing works here, then that becomes a problem. And of course, this takes a lot of analysis, and that is what that is why we are here as a channel, Connect Africa, because some of us have a lot of experience studying Pan-Africanism and studying imperialism. So that is why we are here to bring that clarity, and that is the very reason people have to support this channel. So we see certain leaders on the African continent making the right moves, trying to move in the right direction, but they need that support. They need that particular support. But when you look at people like President Ruto in Kenya, President Ruto has a great vision for this continent. And even today, a meeting which was held in Nairobi, he articulated some of these things which he sees that we should be doing as a continent, where we should be going. But he has so much challenges within Kenya itself that people don't have a lot of trust in him. In the same way that you see that Nkrumah faced a lot of problems in Ghana, during his period, even though he was trying to fight for the continent, to the point that he was overthrown from power, removed from power, with the help, of course, of the outsiders, but the people inside also played a very big role in this project of removing him from power. So we need to recognize that fact as Africans. Now, on the other side, we need to recognize the importance of the resources which we have. We have so much resources which are in demand everywhere across the world. When you are talking about lithium batteries, President Cyril Ramaphosa was in Democratic Republic of Congo recently. He was talking about lithium batteries, manufacturing of lithium batteries, the sources of energy which we have. We have, for example, the Inga, dam, which has not been built, which can supply electricity to almost more than 20% of the African continent. We have the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, which has been facing tremendous challenges. It has, and successfully, this one was completed successfully. So these are things which we need to also recognize, that we have the resources, and we should have that faith that we can do it as Africans. We have the population, we have the market. But we also have to understand that we cannot develop with the colonial system as Africans. And we have to let go of the colonial system, the colonial political system, and adopt what were our ancestors talking about. What was Nkrumah talking about? What continent did he want Africa to look like? So we should ask our questions. We should ask ourselves these questions. People like Sobukwe, Robert Sobukwe of South Africa, what did he want Africa to look like? Because he called for a unified Africa. Sankara, all these people, what were they doing? Sankara is mentioned many times, but what did he want the continent to look like? We should go back and examine, because the advice today which we are taking it from the West, and the West, they do not want us to come from the problems which we have. And then we have the GDP, of course. We have spoken about the GDP which we have as Africa. If you combine our GDP across the continent, we are the 50th biggest economy across the globe. But this cannot be of any advantage, if we don't integrate it, if we do not aggregate it. Now, because India, which is almost the same GDP as us, has aggregated GDP. Look at the companies it is attracting. It is attracting General Electric to build, aircraft in its country. It is attracting Tesla to build, cars in its country, electric cars in its country. And what is Africa doing? We are not attracting any of these high value investments on the African continent. Why? Because of that fragmentation. And now that pushes us into working for a unified Africa as the only salvation for us. The same way, with the same intensity which Nkrumah was fighting for the unification of Africa in 1953, 1950s. Nkrumah was fighting with so much intensity to unify the African continent. That is the same intensity that we are supposed to transfer on ourselves. We have to borrow that intensity, and even remember the words he said, that the knowledge that death can never extinguish the torch I've lit across Ghana and the African continent. That long, when I'm dead and gone, that torch will continue to be carried and give guidance to all people. You see, so this is the prophecy which he left us. So that means that we are supposed to carry the torch which he left us, and then carry on with the same intensity. Because what was he trying to do? He was fighting for the unification, because that was the only card that he saw as the source of our total liberation and independence. And it is still today, even today, that we have to unify so that we can be able to take advantage of the technology transfers that are happening, like how India is doing it, because it is unified and we are fragmented. So investors will not be attracted to a place which is fragmented and in chaos, and different leaders different heads of state are going in different directions, they are running in different directions. They cannot come to a place like that. So those are the advantages, and the fact that also Africa is at the center of the world. Africa is at the center of the world. So you should be able to manufacture products cheaply compared to anywhere, whether it's China, whether it's India. You should be able to manufacture products for India, for the United States, for you, because you are at the center of the world. So geopolitically, we are located at one of the most strategically important, places on the global map. So these are the things I think that we need to be working on. And these are the things actually we as Connect Africa, we are engaged in. We understand that this is a huge challenge, but then if we don't do it, who's going to do it? So we must make our contribution. And that is why we are inviting all of you out there to come and make your contribution. Thank you so much, Mahlet.
Thank you very much, Kwame, for that powerful message on the Sunday evening before we start our the next week. So it's good to hear and to be reminded that our duties and obligations, not just talking, but what are we doing? Are we contributing one way or the other? by repeating or kind of repeating those not negative. They can be true, but there are some positive things that we can talk about. We can be thankful that we can comment our own people, so that positive attracts positive things. I mean, at least that's the law in the universe. I'm not talking about the physics thing of negative and positive pole, but yeah, we have to look at the things that we have done and criticize also what we think needs to be criticized. Now, as far as our talking points are concerned for tonight, we are covered. But as always, we try to give few minutes for our viewers for their comments and questions here. So we have a new audience here who in the chat section. Black, welcome. But okay, this one is Rakesh Barman. He says your premise of treating a whole African continent as as monolith is flawed in my view. I think you came maybe halfway or in the last section. It's totally the opposite what Kwame has been analyzing. In fact, we have been saying because Africa is so diversified, and that's one of the problem. In fact, let alone Africa. Kwame, in his analysis, says that even for India is not, it's one country, but it's not that unified country. Another thing that he commented is, I guess you want to unify whole Africa as one entity, but in reality, it's not. It's an utopian idea. Utopian, I think, idea, but it cannot happen. I highly doubt it. Well,
yeah, I will answer to him. Those are the people I like answering to very much.
Okay, so go quickly.
Is that the same Rakesh?
Yeah, same Rakesh, probably.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that I don't know whether he's in Africa. It's unfortunate that he may not be an African. But if Africa is unified, it may not be the first. It will not be the first place to be unified by itself. Even India itself, before colonialism, was not totally unified. If you look at it, at the United States, they came together. They started with 13 states, to unify. They were not unified. The United States itself, Europe itself, which you are seeing today, they have a single passport. And economic zone, a single economic zone. They were not unified, a few years ago. So that, the idea that Africa cannot do it when others can do it, I think that idea is out of the window. It does not hold, it's not scientific, it's not based on anything factual that you can say that we cannot unify. When you look at the African people, I've been to, I was born in Uganda, I've been to Ghana, I've been to Kenya. My grandmother was born in Tanzania. I've been to Sierra Leone. I really did not see anything substantially different about Africans and how we are living as a people. So we have the same hopes and aspirations. And when we are talking about unification, we are unifying around the common goals. Like we want to improve our status on the global stage. That one, every African wants it. We want to improve our infrastructure. That every African wants it. The things which are different about us, they cannot be unified. Like the various identities of the African people, like we have said, the 2,000 tribes, more than 2,000 tribes. Those ones we do not want actually to unify them, but rather we want to protect them. And there's no better way of protecting them other than in a unified Africa. So the unified Africa doesn't mean the abolition of our tribes and cultures. It actually means their protection, that you have now a huge body, a huge system, a huge fence, or a huge protection system across the African continent, which goes out there and competes on the global stage and brings you those goods which you cannot get when you are a single country. And then, of course, when we have a single unified Africa here, then our countries are stronger, unified. All together, we are stronger They cannot bully us like you see what happened to Libya. You see what happened to Somalia in 1993. Recently, just here in 2020, 2021, you saw the United States was trying to bully Ethiopia into submission. But all these can only be combated. These challenges can be combated by a unified Africa, that it protects us from external aggressors. That is number one. It takes care of our, of improving our status on the global stage. Security, I've mentioned it, and then foreign policy, and then our economic well-being. We want our welfare to be, improved. So there's no other way of doing it. And the wisdom of our forefathers, I'm not talking about the sellouts which you are seeing, many of them masquerading across the continent, but our forefathers, our founders, they saw it and they agreed that this was the only solution. And for those, I would like to warn those who are saying that it's not possible. It is very possible. Why this idea is possible, of all the other, reasons I've given you, why it is possible is that a simple idea which was born outside Africa, the African continent, in the 17th, in the 19th century, which was born outside Africa, the idea of unifying Africa, it came here to Africa in the 20th century, and that simple idea was carried by a man called Kwame Gonza to Addis Ababa until the Organization of African Unity was formed, which we have as the African Union today. And if you look at the aspirations of the African Union today, political integration is one of those things that they are trying to, that we are trying to achieve. So I argue against anyone who is saying that it is not possible. It is very possible. It may take time, but it is very possible that we are going to achieve it.
Thank you very much, Kwame, for addressing that. So Black says, I recently heard one Indian scholar saying the West has created the state of Pakistan to destabilize India, just like the West created Ukraine to destabilize Russia and Taiwan to destabilize China and Italy. So he continues, Black continues and say, I guess this could be another perspective to analyze and study. The West might have mapped the entire global borders according to their economic and geopolitical interests, indeed.
I agree. I agree. Of course, India's problems, all of them with Pakistan, they started after the British. It was the British who were there to colonize that place, and they started, dividing the place because you have Muslims on the other side, and then you have the Hindu, and it's the same situation. He's right. What he has said is very right, and of course, various nations have to struggle. These nations have to struggle with these challenges until they overcome them. Because if you were able, let me tell you, if you were able to overcome colonialism, China was able to overcome colonialism, then it should be able to overcome the idea that it should be able to unify, Taiwan with itself. And it was actually able to wait for more than 99 years and reunify Hong Kong with China. It was able to wait for 99 years. So I think the Chinese are some of the very patient people, very, very patient, and they see things in the long term. So for Taiwan, you can be guaranteed that the Chinese will unify Taiwan, regardless of the protestations of the West and what it is doing, because China is becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. So when it has reached that point where it feels that it has enough strength, it may go and take Taiwan by force. Of course, there will be challenges. For India's issue, when it comes to Pakistan, I don't know whether they can still, unify with the fact that now Pakistan has nuclear weapons and India has nuclear weapons. I don't know. It is possible. It is possible. It is about leaders, good leaders. You may get good leaders in a generation, and they sit down and they say, well, what's the point in this, disturbance that we are putting up against each other? Why don't we let our people live in peace, and then we unify the technological capabilities of both India and Pakistan and move forward and create a very strong nation that is able to compete on a global stage. That would be a good idea. So you can never count anything out. These things are all, possible. No one ever thought that there would be a country like the United States. But, it was just about 200 years ago when it was formed. It was a colony of Britain. Everyone during that period, thought that, Britain is going to expand or something and create a new nation, a British nation or something, new world and stuff like that. But a nation was created out of nowhere, which is now the most powerful nation on the globe. So no one knew about that 200 years ago, 300 years ago, how the United States as the most powerful nation. So never count things out. And the fact that spaces like in Africa, the African Union is already their testament to the aspirations, because that is where the dream of unifying Africa is being now kept. That idea is there, is visible now. So anyone who would argue against Africa, that one, I really question their understanding of facts, even the facts, if they have facts. If someone has facts, then they can come and we can invite them to this program to make an argument and defend it. If you have, those facts, against the unification of Africa, that Africa cannot unify, you can bring your argument and bring your points, and then we can, we can iron it out. But all these things are possible.
Thank you very much, Kwame, and thank you very much, our viewers, for for tuning in and for your comments, questions, and suggestions. So that's it for us as far as India's relation, India's outsmarting Africa, India's policy in terms of attracting investment, and how that is outsmarting Africa, by making a comparison between the two. That was really informative. I find it, and I'm sure others also find it like that. So if you like this video, please share it, give it a like, and then share it with others, as we always say. In that way, we can empower each other with information and knowledge. But even more so, you can support us. You can find it in the description section with our PayPal account. That will help us also to be consistent and be here more often. Thank you, Kwame, for your time, for sparing your time on the weekend, on Sunday night. I know how that is difficult. So yeah, thank you. Have a good evening, everyone, and have a blessed week ahead. Ciao. Bye bye.